Mr Glenn Maloney, the Secretary-Manager of the West Leagues Club, said both he and his committee were amazed of the situation that had developed with John Raper and the Oldham Club in England. John Raper had not mentioned this to either Mr Maloney or the West Committee, and so far the West Committee had not discussed it with Johnny Raper. Johnny Raper is the property of West's Leagues Club for the next 5 years, that is as a complete footballer. I'm sure that, in my opinion, that Johnny Raper will have a hard job getting to England to play football, but it could happen only with the sanction of West's, and West's would need a lot of money to let Raper play football elsewhere because he belongs to them.
Mr Druckmann, what's the purpose of the visit today?
Well, the visit is to make a perusal and a study of what's going on in this area. We have heard a great deal about Australia, and we wanted to see one of the smaller cities and what goes on and how it's developed, and we've been shown around by some local hosts and had an opportunity to see how they develop waterfront land and industrial properties. And
your interest is primarily in development of land?
Yes, our interest is primarily in development of land, that's right.
And you gentlemen here are only a small part of a group which left Hawaii some time ago?
Yes, about a month ago there were 94 of our group, several of them, about 20 of which were Canadians. And we made a tour of Japan and Manila and Taipei and into Bangkok, Hong Kong, Singapore, and now there's a group of 19 of us who are going to tour Australia and go into New Zealand.
Are you looking at our area and these other areas with the object of development and investment?
Well, not necessarily. We're interested primarily in seeing what you're doing and learning from you if we can, and in some cases we're maybe able to help some of your local people with some of the experience we've had. We found that there's some 50 members of the Urban Land Institute in Australia, and they get our publications and they're familiar with what we're trying to do, and so we have a dialogue going on. We have a common understanding of problems, and I think we're both going to benefit from the visit.
What are the universal problems that land developers are having? Are
well,
common problems?
Well, I'd say they are in many cases, some more applicable than others, but we find that high land costs are a problem in many areas, not only in America, but in other countries also. And I know that land costs in the Sydney area, the figures we've been given, are astronomical. The land is very expensive, and particularly for housing. Residential land sells, I think, at a higher price in the Sydney area than it does in most of our American cities. That's one of our problems. Another problem is rising construction costs. And I know you are having that to some extent, but we're really having it in our country. And as a consequence, we're trying to find ways to get higher densities, to cluster our housing, to go to townhouses and to go to high-rise apartments and things like that. And we've seen some very interesting things in Sydney, and I'm sure we'll see others in other places in your country before we leave.
With high-rise development, one of the problems is recreation areas.
Well, high-rise developments generally don't go into recreational areas. Most recreational real estate is developed as garden apartments or as cluster housing or townhouses, but some of the recreational real estate is becoming so valuable in some areas of America that they are forced to go high-rise. Down in Florida, there are many, many high-rise condominium buildings that are located right around golf courses. So I think that we're going to see more and more high-rise around recreational real estate in the future.
And we must ask you, were you impressed with Lake Macquarie?
Very, very much impressed with Lake Macquarie. It reminds me personally of Western Canada, the area around Vancouver and down into Seattle and Puget Sound area. It's very, very impressive. You have some beautiful land areas around the lakes, and I can understand why people want to live here. It's certainly a better way of life, I think, than those people who live in Sydney enjoy. I wouldn't want them to know that I think so, but I believe the smart ones are moving out this way.
How about the automobiles, Roy?
Well, the automobiles, of course, are a problem everywhere. We are having trouble finding ways to handle our traffic in America. There's two theories. One that is subscribed to by some areas in Europe, and I think some of your people in Sydney feel that if you make it difficult for people to use their car in the downtown areas, difficult to find places to park, expensive to park, difficult to get around, that they'll leave their cars at home and won't bring them into the downtown areas. So far, that theory hasn't been adopted in America. We try to get as many people as we can downtown, and we're choking ourselves to death, figuratively and literally, because we not only are choking the roads and freeways, but we're choking our people because of the high pollution resulting from the concentration of automobiles emitting pollutants into the air.
You're obviously looking at development in a very broad aspect.
Yes, we are on a broad aspect. We're not. Some of us, no doubt, might become interested in some real estate, forming partnerships with some of your people, and I would believe that some of our people will be coming back here one of these days to make some investments and become involved, because they certainly have been favorably impressed with everything they've seen in Australia, particularly the kindness and the generosity of the people that we've come in contact with.
The loading heads of the Carrington coal loader are up in the air and away from the sheaf mount again. She's been held up for several days this week by a strike by the Maritime Crane and Shiploading Union. 157 men who had a manning dispute in the tipping house where coal is unloaded from rail trucks for consignment to the two coal loaders, the Carrington loader here and the Dyke End loader across in the Steelworks Channel. This dispute was settled this afternoon, at least settled temporarily, by a conference before Commissioner Mr. McCarthy in Newcastle. The men have agreed to go back to pre-stoppage conditions on condition that within 7 days the Maritime Services Board holds a conference with them to discuss their manning dispute. Mr. McCarthy has undertaken to make an on-site inspection and make a ruling on the dispute if agreement isn't reached at these talks. But today the engineering men have gone out and they will not operate these loading heads, and so the sheaf mount still cannot load. However, they will be able to be unloading of coal and stacking of coal in the receiving area of the Carrington loader. Since February of this year, there seems to have been one delay after another to ships waiting to load coal in Newcastle. It was in February that the loader itself had a breakdown which caused a bank up of shipping over a period of a few days. This bank up of shipping was almost cleared away, and then there was a problem with deliveries of coal to the loader, and again ships were held up. That was closely followed by a stoppage by tugmen. The loader was just about clear of the backlog of shipping which developed through this crisis, and then came the strike by the men at the tipping house. Now the engineering section is the problem that's causing trouble. It's difficult to know when next the heads at the coal loader will be out over the holds of a ship and coal will be flowing into its hatches. Newcastle is to have a container terminal with full customs facilities to receive containers from overseas. It'll be on a 12-acre site of land at Sandgate, a joint terminal, incorporated and transport terminal, and operated by Chadwick's and AF Toll. The man who'll be responsible for establishing and operating this is Mr. Lewins of Chadwick's.
Well, we have just received final permission from the customs authorities to go ahead with our ideas for this terminal, and we feel that the size and location of the facility will overcome the problems that we have foreseen for Newcastle with containers for a few years to come anyway.
Mr. Lewins, you've chosen an area well away from urban development.
Well, we've done this with a purpose, of course. The idea of coming out as far as this is to withdraw the transport, or the concentrated transport, from an area which we feel is already pretty heavily congested. We don't think that, generally speaking, residents like to have their weekend peace or their afternoons shattered by the loud of noisy engines, and we've come out here with that specific purpose in mind.
You're very handy to both rail and road.
Yes, actually, if you see the far corner down behind the tree, this fence here, running all the way up here, will be the boundary of the new Newcastle bypass. This also we've done with a purpose in mind, as you can imagine. With a container facility such as this, it's very necessary to have both your rail and your road adjacent to your depot.
Well, they say West is best, but my guest this evening will be none other than the great Australian player and now captain of New South Wales, Johnny Raper. How are you, John?
Very good, thank you, Noel.
John, again, congratulations, and I'm sure this has been heaped upon you on making the state side and captain of the state side again. You must feel very proud.
I feel very proud, Noel, mainly because I have come back after being discarded last year. And I must say to all the country boys who I play with on Saturday, thank you very much, because I think they were responsible for me getting the captaincy. I had instructions to carry out from Martha Summons. They went on determined. They followed my instructions on the field, and they definitely helped me to get this job. There's no doubt about that.
Well, I viewed the game on television, and it was a pretty good game in parts, but the country boys did very well, and some of the fellas that have been picked with you, Wakefield for instance, had a remarkable game, I thought, John.
Well, Noel, in New Zealand I predicted a very big game for this lad. Over in New Zealand, Wakefield performed that way, so much so that I thought he was a star of the whole tour, particularly under the bad conditions, and also at Auckland, when we played Auckland. He got a very bad knock, which he needed around about 6 or 7 stitches in his mouth, but he wanted to come back on the field. Naturally, we never let him come back on the field, but he did show that drive and that go, particularly for a young fellow, that will definitely help him later on in his career.
And one of the players that I thought, watching on TV, that must have been unlucky to miss being picked in the New South Wales side because he tackled from everywhere was Terry Penowitz.
Oh yes, well, I said as a matter of fact after the game that I was lucky in my prime that fella never had another 2 stone on him, because I'm a great admirer of Terry Penowitz. He's been a constant thorn in my side when he came down with the countryside itself, and I appreciated Terry's ability, and I also appreciated his help so much on that New Zealand tour, and particularly with the younger fellows. He helped them so much, Noel, as did Paul Quinn. And I feel that those fellows that did go over there, that you'll be hearing a lot more of these young chaps.
John, the difference in training methods is going to crop up now, isn't it, between, say, Harry Barth, Arthur Summons, and perhaps your own ideas? What's going to happen now?
Well, Noel, a funny thing, I've been under both Barth and Summons and been able to adjust myself accordingly, and I feel that having been under Barth, I'll know what to expect from Harry, and under Arthur, which I knew what to expect from him. I don't think there will be any difficulty. I know these, particularly the city players' style of play, and now I know the country boys' style of play, so it's going to be a lot easier job for Harry Barth to coach the side in some respect, because I know the country boys, he knows the city boys, and he knows I'm a fella that'll work in with him.
John, do you think there were any surprises in the selection of the team? I know you're going to say yourself for one, but we don't believe that. But do you think there was any surprises in the team?
I don't think so, Noel. I expected 5 of the country players to get in, and I expected the city players who are in the side to be retained. I didn't think they'd drop Bob McCarthy. I thought that he did have a bad game on Saturday, but I thought they'd keep him. I'm glad they kept him, because I've not played with McCarthy, and I feel that I can get him through a few gaps, and I'm looking forward to doing this. And with Costello in the second row, I feel that he definitely earned his position. He played a marvellous game in that city seconds there on Saturday.
What about Jim Morgan in preference to both Sattler and O'Neill?
Well, I thought that Morgan was the better of the 4 props on the day, Noel. I thought that John Wittenberg was contained by Paul Quinn, and I think Paul Hazard blotted Johnny Sattler out. Whereas with John O'Neill, they see the whole Sydney pack fell into the old trick, which we usually fall into as far as the country is concerned now. We decided that they decided to try and run over the top of us and instead of trying to move the ball around us. And our fellas got up amongst them, and they've certainly hit that ground very hard, and they didn't like it.
Well, my guest has been none other than the New South Wales captain, Johnny Raper, and I'm sure that Newcastle will be right behind Johnny and his boys when they play Queensland tomorrow.
Thanks very much, Noel. It's a pleasure to be on your program.
Take it from me, kiddo, believe me, my country, 'tis of you. Land of the Clewitt shirt, Boston garter, and spearmint girl with the wriggly eyes. Of you, land of the arrow-eyed and Earl and Wilson collars. of you I sing. Land of Abraham Lincoln and Lydia E. Pinkham. Land above all of just add hot water and serve. From every BVD let freedom ring, amen.
Excuse me, this is the sort of poetry you consider the highest expression of English language?
I don't know whether you'd consider it the highest expression of English language as such.
Then why do the media that propound English today, the newspapers, the radio and the television, have no time for poetry?
Because I think poetry is a thing that's limited to a certain type of person's understanding, unless they're just terribly simple poems. But I think you find today that poetry can be, and is in most cases, under the pen of a good poet, a fairly complicated thing to understand for the ordinary person.
Would you think then that there's a special kind of language that goes into newspapers or television?
Oh yes, I think there definitely is a commercial language more than anything. I think it stands it's very difficult. It'd be very difficult to incorporate, say, poetry into a newspaper or into our modern commercial medium.
And what's television in particular doing to the English language, in your opinion?
Debasing it, I think, especially through advertisements.
Why?
Oh, well, I think, well, not just advertisements, particularly, say, a TV program. A person might sit down to watch a TV program rather than, say, go and read a novel. And in that advertising, the language becomes very colloquial and everything. This becomes the most common form of advertising language to get through to the most people.
Would you agree with that?
Yes, quite.
You don't like colloquial language?
There's a time and a place for all types of language, and I don't think TV is the place for the colloquial language, because people use colloquial language normally, and if they hear colloquial language on television, they won't come into contact with the other form of language, that is the more formal language.
Would you like to see your language on television and other media more formal then, would you?
Oh, well, it's better if people come into more contact with all forms of language, and if they come into contact with the more cultural language rather than the more colourful, it would do them a lot more good than it is at present by just hearing colloquial language all the time and slang.
Do you think television should try and raise the standard of English used in the community?
It depends what your own idea of television is, the use of television is for. If it's just for entertainment, then I think anybody who wants other forms of entertainment with high forms of language can get it in other ways. But if you think that television is people are forgetting about novels and drama and other forms, and that television is the only time they get close to any other kind of language, then it should be.
Do you think the television stations are falling down on the job?
I think they're catering. I think they're concentrating on catering to taste instead of setting standards or new standards, which it is possible to set, I think. I think they are inclined to cater to the lowest common denominator because it will be the more popular. And often all the higher standards are more unpopular. But I really feel it is its duty to cater to the higher standards.
I don't think there's anything wrong with colloquial language, really. I don't think that's where television's falling down. You've got to get in, well, they're appealing to the mass media, and into that they bring colloquialism, but that's just the way the English language has come in now. It's a new form of English language. There's nothing wrong with it, really. It's quite apt on TV.
You people are part of the mass too, you know.
Yes, I'm taking in that. I think really TV should broaden a bit, but then poetry's more a personal thing. It's usually everyone that reads poetry has their own poet that they like to read, and whereas if you put poetry onto television, you're not catering for the norm. I mean, there's going to be a lot of people that might like another poet better or this sort of thing.
Well, let's get back to this colourful language that was referred to earlier. Well, without colloquial language, the language isn't going to grow, is it?
Oh, I agree. I think that the language is constantly changing, expanding, and that the more television reflects the speech patterns of the community as a whole, the more in tune with the people it will be. I think this is perfectly all right.
And do you think we are reflecting the speech patterns as a whole?
Yes. At the same time, I do think that television, commercial television particularly, falls down in its responsibility to lift the cultural standards of people. This, I think, is quite different from the type of language used.
Have you got any suggestions on how we should do it?
Well, not concrete ones at the moment. They caught me. But certainly I'd like to see good Australian drama and poetry produced more on commercial television. This is not done at all as far as I know, but except many years ago, I remember one of the best plays I've ever seen on television was an Australian play called Shadow of a Pale Horse, produced on, I think, Channel 7. But this movement hasn't continued.